The summer of 1885 in Drywell, New Mexico was the kind of summer that dried everything down to its bones. The river had gone to mud in June. The mud had gone to cracked earth by July. And on a Thursday morning, in the middle of that July, behind the Dusty Mare's saloon, a man named Roy Slade stood in the alley with his thumbs in his belt loops and watched his two small charges sort through the kitchen scraps the cook had thrown out before noon. He did not help them. He did not tell them to stop. He simply watched with the patient expression of a man who has decided that a problem left alone will eventually solve itself. Ada found the biscuit first. It was hard, gone gray at the edges, the kind of thing the cook had thrown away without a second thought. She turned it over in her hands once, the way someone checks a thing not for quality, but simply to confirm it exists. Then she broke it down the middle. She did not look up when she broke it. She did not look at Slade. She turned and held out the larger half behind her without a word, without a sound, and June took it from her fingers, the way June always took things Ada offered, immediately, completely, with both hands. June ate 2 bites. Then she stopped. She looked down at what was left in her palm. Her mouth was still moving, still working through what she'd already taken in. But her hand went slowly to the pocket of her dress, the small square pocket their mother had sewn into the left side, the pocket that had once held smooth stones and interesting sticks and the small ordinary treasures of a child with enough safety in her life to collect things for no reason at all. She put the rest of the biscuit in the pocket. She patted it flat with her palm. Her face did not change. That was the thing that stopped Harlan Cole where he stood. Not the biscuit, not the alley, not the heat, not the 2 small girls in their worn dresses with their bare feet in the red New Mexico. Dust, it was the face. 5 years old, and already she had learned to want something and show nothing. Already she had learned that the window for having food was short, and the only logical answer to that was to make it last, and the only way to make it last was to be quiet about needing it at all. Harlan had come around the back of the saloon because the front door was being repaired, and the carpenter had the whole porch blocked. He had not intended to stop. He had not intended to see anything that would require him to be a different man than the one he had spent 3 years carefully becoming. A man who kept to himself, asked nothing of the town, and expected the town to return the courtesy. He stopped anyway, because some things once seen do not allow you to simply continue walking. Roy Slade noticed him then. He looked across the alley at Harlan with the mild expression of a man who sees no reason to be defensive about what he's doing, because technically he is not doing anything at all. "Cole," he said, pleasantly. Harlan looked at the 2 girls. He looked at Slade. He looked at the pocket of June's dress, at the small flat shape of the biscuit pressed against the fabric. He did not say anything yet, but he did not walk away. Before we go any further, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story has traveled today. Their names were Ada and June Calloway. Harlan learned that later from Marta Bess, who ran the dry goods store on the north end of Main Street, and who knew everything about everyone in Drywell, the way women who stand behind counters all day tend to know things, not because people tell them, but because people forget they are listening. Ada was 6. June had turned 5 in April. 3 weeks after their mother was buried, their father, Thomas Calloway, had worked a small land claim on the western edge of the territory. Not a rich man, not a poor one. A man who owned something real and knew it, and had refused, twice in writing, to sell it to the Santa Fe Land Consortium when their representative came through Drywell in the spring of 1884. He was dead by October of that same year. The fire started in the kitchen. Sheriff Mercer had written in his report accidental, no evidence of foul play. The words were clean and official, and signed at the bottom with the particular confidence of a man who knows no one will look twice. Eleanor Calloway lasted 3 weeks after her husband. Fever, the doctor said, came on fast. The same doctor whose name appeared on 4 other death certificates in Drywell County. In the past 2 years, all of them connected in one way or another to land that someone else wanted. Roy Slade arrived 6 weeks after Eleanor's burial with a notarized guardianship document from Santa Fe and a carpet bag, and the unhurried manner of a man who has already won and knows it and sees no reason to rush. He was Thomas Calloway's second cousin, distant enough that nobody in Drywell had ever heard Thomas mention him. Close enough, apparently, to satisfy whatever judge in Santa Fe had signed the paperwork without asking too many questions. Ada had her father's eyes, dark and steady and set slightly too deep in her face, the kind of eyes that took things in without broadcasting what they made of what they saw. She was thin in the way children get thin when they are not eating enough, but are too proud or too frightened or too accustomed to it to say so. Her hair had been braided once, carefully, by someone who knew how. Now it was coming undone at the ends, in the way of hair that nobody has tended in a long time. She held June's hand when they walked, not the loose, easy handhold of children who have always felt safe. The tight, purposeful grip of a child who has decided that her sister's hand is the one thing in the world she is absolutely certain about. June was smaller, rounder in the face, with eyes that were their mother's, lighter, quicker to move, taking in everything around her with an attention that was not yet guarded the way Ada's was, but was learning. She had a habit of putting her fingers to her lips when she was uncertain. She did it often. She did not speak much in those days. Neither of them did. When Harlan had stepped into that alley on Thursday morning, he had not known any of this yet. He had known only what he could see. 2 small girls, 1 biscuit, 1 pocket, and a man standing 6 feet away, watching them with his thumbs in his belt and the expression of someone waiting for an inconvenience to resolve itself. He had asked Marta Bess about them that same afternoon. Marta had told him everything she knew, which was considerable, in the flat voice of a woman who has been angry about something for a long time and has run out of ways to make that anger useful. "Slade's not cruel," she said, in the careful way people say things that are technically true but deeply insufficient. "He feeds them, keeps them clothed enough, brings them into town when he needs people to see him being responsible." She folded the cloth she'd been holding without looking at it. But those girls were laughing children 8 months ago. "You understand what I'm telling you?" Harlan understood. It is easy to step aside when the wrong is quiet enough to ignore. But ask yourself, if you had stood in that alley, if you had seen that pocket, if you had seen that face, would you have walked away? Or is there a line, somewhere inside you, that the world is not allowed to cross. Harlan did not make a decision so much as find himself already in the middle of one. That was how it happened. Later, when he tried to trace it back to a single point, there was no moment where he sat down and weighed the thing. There was only the alley on Thursday, and then Friday morning, and then Saturday, and by the time a week had passed, he had left food on the back step of the dry goods store 3 times, and had not spoken to the girls directly at all. He had seen them find it. The first morning, Ada spotted the cloth-wrapped parcel from across the street and stopped walking. She stood completely still for a long moment, the way a deer stands still, not frozen with fear exactly, but suspended, running a calculation too fast and too quiet to observe from the outside. Then she looked up and around the street with those dark, steady eyes, checking every doorway, every window. She did not see Harlan. He was around the corner of the feed store, watching through the gap between the building and the water barrel, and he was aware that this was not a dignified position for a grown man, but he stayed in it anyway because moving would have meant she saw him, and he did not think that would help yet. Ada walked to the step. She picked up the parcel. She unwrapped one corner, looked inside, wrapped it back up, and tucked it under her arm. She walked back to June, who had not moved from the spot where Ada had left her, standing on the boardwalk with her fingers at her lips and her eyes on her sister the whole time. Ada said something too quiet to hear. June looked at the parcel. She reached out and touched the cloth with 2 fingers very gently, as if confirming it was real. Then she looked up at Ada with an expression that Harlan felt in the center of his chest, like a struck match. Not happiness exactly, not relief. Something smaller and more careful than either. Something that had learned not to be too large. It was Marta Bess who finally said what needed saying. She came to his door on a Tuesday evening with a dish of something wrapped in cloth and the expression of a woman who has decided to stop being subtle. "Slade's drinking more," she said, when Harlan had let her in and put the dish on the table. "When he drinks, he locks the Kiro shed and puts those girls in it for the night so they don't bother him." She sat down without being asked. "It happened twice last week." Ada had the sense to keep June quiet, but the Garrett boy, he lives backing onto that property. He heard them in there. She paused. He heard June crying. Harlan looked at the dish on the table. "Not crying loud," Marta said. "That's what the boy said. He said it was the kind of crying you almost couldn't hear, like she was trying not to." The room was quiet. Outside, the New Mexico evening was doing what it did in July, cooling fast and final, the heat pulling back from the earth like a tide going out, leaving the dark smelling of dry sage and cooling dust. "There's a room," Harlan said, "in my house. It's got a window that faces east." Marta looked at him. "It's not much," he said. "But it's not a kerosene shed." He went the next morning. Slade was on the porch when Harlan came up the road, sitting in the one good chair with a tin cup and the unhurried posture of a man who owns the ground he's sitting on and wants that to be the first thing you notice. He smiled when he saw Harlan. It was a good smile, the practice kind. "Cole," he said, "what brings you out this way?" "The girls," Harlan said. "I'd like to take them for a spell. Give you some time without the responsibility." Slade's smile stayed exactly in place. "That's a kind offer," he said, in the tone of a man who does not find it kind at all. But they're my wards. I take that seriously. I know you do, Harlan said. They looked at each other. Harlan had learned a long time ago that silence made men like Slade uncomfortable in a way that argument did not, because argument gave them something to push against, and silence gave them nothing. He waited. Slade took a sip from his cup. "A week," he said finally. "I've got business in Socorro anyway." "A week won't hurt anything." Ada came to the door of the house when Slade called them. She stood in the doorway with June directly behind her. June's hands holding the back of Ada's dress, the way they always did when something was uncertain. Ada looked at Harlan with those dark eyes and did not look at Slade at all. "You're going with Mr. Cole for a few days," Slade said. "Be good." Ada said nothing. June's fingers tightened on Ada's dress. Harlan crouched down so he was at their level. He did not smile too wide. He did not speak too fast. He had been around enough frightened things in his life. Horses, mostly, but the principle was the same, to know that the worst thing you could do was rush. "My house is about half a mile that way," he said, and pointed west. "It's got a porch, and I made biscuits this morning." June's eyes moved to his face at the word biscuits. It was the first time she had looked directly at him. It lasted only a second before she looked back down at the ground. But it had happened, and Harlan counted it for what it was. Not trust, not yet, not anywhere close to trust, but the smallest possible movement in that direction. He started walking west. After a moment, he heard two sets of small feet on the dry earth behind him. He did not look back. The house was not much to look at. One main room with a table and two chairs and a stone fireplace that Harlan had built himself the first winter, the mortar slightly uneven on the left side, where he'd run out of patience. A kitchen shelf along the back wall with tin cups and a cast iron pan and a row of dried herbs hanging from a nail. Thyme, sage, something darker he'd never learned the name of, but that the previous owner had left, and that smelled like the desert after rain. A bedroom off the main room, and at the end of a short hallway, the second room, east-facing window, like he'd said. A narrow bed with a wool blanket folded at the foot. A wooden crate turned upside down for a table. A candle on the crate. He showed it to them without commentary. Ada stood in the doorway and looked at the room, the way she looked at everything, completely, systematically, checking each corner before she let her eyes rest anywhere. June stood behind her, with her chin almost touching Ada's shoulder, peering around at the window, at the candle, at the blanket. Neither of them went in. Harlan left them to it. He went back to the kitchen and put the biscuits on the table and poured water into 2 tin cups and sat down and waited. Because waiting was the only thing that worked with frightened things, and he had enough patience left in him, for that at least. He heard them in the hallway, small sounds, the creak of the floorboard near the door, a whisper he couldn't make out, Ada's voice, low and careful. And then a sound from June that was not quite a word, more like a breath shaped into something that meant yes, or okay, or I don't know, but I'll follow you. They came to the table. They sat in the 2 chairs. Ada closest to the door, June beside her, and looked at the biscuits and the water and did not touch anything. Harlan pushed the plate toward them. Ada looked at the plate. She looked at Harlan. She reached out and took one biscuit, broke it in half, and passed half to June before she took a single bite herself. June held the half biscuit in both hands and looked at it for a moment that went on just slightly too long. Then she put one small bite in her mouth. Then she looked up at Harlan with those light eyes and looked away again immediately, as if looking had been an accident. Harlan drank his coffee and said nothing and let them eat in whatever peace they could find. That first night he woke at 2 in the morning to a sound so small he almost convinced himself he had imagined it. He lay still and listened. It came again from the east room. Not crying, not the full open sound of a child who feels safe enough to cry completely. Something smaller, a breath that caught and broke and caught again, like a bird hitting glass over and over in the dark, not understanding why the air had stopped June. He lay there and listened and did not go in, because going in would have meant a strange man appearing in their doorway in the dark, and that would have been worse, not better. He lay there instead and listened to the small broken sound of a 5-year-old, trying not to make noise with her grief. And he stared at the ceiling of his bedroom, and he thought about Thomas and Eleanor Calloway, who had loved their daughters enough, that the absence of them was still this loud, this present, this impossible to sleep through. After a while, the sound stopped. He heard Ada's voice, then a murmur, almost nothing. The sound of words not meant to carry, then quiet. He did not sleep again until nearly dawn. The days settled into a shape slowly, the way water finds its level. Not all at once, but by degrees, each day a little less sharp than the one before. Harlan rose before them and made coffee and put food on the table before they woke. He had learned by the third morning that they needed to see the food already there when they came out. If he was still at the stove when they appeared in the doorway, Ada would stop and wait, pulling June back with one hand, and they would stand there until he moved away from the kitchen entirely. So he moved away. He took his coffee to the porch and sat in the early morning before the heat came and listened to the desert wake up, and after a while he would hear the small sounds of them at the table inside, the clink of a tin cup, the soft tear of bread, June's voice asking Ada something in that near-silent way she had, and Ada's answer, always shorter, always quieter. He did not try to join them for those first mornings. He let them have the kitchen. On the fourth day, June appeared in the porch doorway while he was sitting with his coffee. She did not come outside. She stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame and looked at him with the careful attention of a child, conducting an observation she had not yet decided how to categorize. She had a piece of bread in her other hand. Harlan looked at the middle distance and drank his coffee. June stood in the doorway for a while. Then she went back inside. He counted it. On the 6th day, Ada came out to the woodpile while he was splitting logs for the evening fire. She stood about 10 feet away and watched him work with those dark, assessing eyes. He kept his movements steady and unhurried. He did not speak first. The axe came down, the wood split, he stacked it. Came down, split, stacked. After a long while, Ada said, "You do it wrong." Harlan stopped. He looked at her. "Papa did it different," she said. Her voice had the careful flatness of someone reporting a fact they are not ready to feel yet. "He said you go for the grain, not against it." Harlan looked at the wood in his hand. "Show me," he said. Ada looked at the axe. She looked at him. She came 3 steps closer, not all the way, just 3 steps, and pointed at the log on the block. "There," she said, "that line. You go with it." Harlan split the next log along the line she'd pointed to. It came apart cleaner than anything he'd split all morning. Ada looked at it. Something moved across her face, small and fast, gone before it fully arrived. Not quite a smile, not quite grief. Something that lived in the narrow space between the two. She went back inside without another word. Harlan stacked the wood and thought about Thomas Calloway teaching his 6-year-old daughter how to read the grain of things. On the 8th night, they slept without waking. He knew because he had been listening, not intentionally, but the house was small and quiet, and he had learned the sounds of their sleep the way you learn any sound that matters. The small shift of the bed when June turned over. The particular silence of Ada, when she was deeply under, different from the lighter silence of the first nights when she had been awake and simply still. That night there was nothing, just the desert outside and the cooling dark and the sound of 2 children breathing evenly in the east room, their exhales falling into the same slow rhythm without either of them knowing it. Harlan lay in his bed and listened to that rhythm for a long time. He could not have explained why it mattered as much as it did. He only knew that it did. It was June who moved first, the way it was always June. On the 11th morning, Harlan came in from the porch to find his coffee cup already on the table, filled. He stopped in the doorway. June was at the far end of the kitchen shelf, very focused on rearranging the tin cups. With her back to him, with the elaborate casualness of someone pretending they have been doing this all along, and this is simply where they happen to be standing. Ada was at the table eating, watching her sister, with an expression that was the closest thing to fond that Ada's face currently allowed. Harlan looked at the cup. The coffee was still hot. She had waited somewhere out of sight and watched for the right moment and poured it and put it exactly where he always set it, and then retreated to the shelf to pretend none of it had happened. He sat down. He drank the coffee. He did not say anything about it because saying something about it would have embarrassed her, and she had offered something small and true, and that kind of thing deserved to be received quietly. But June, still facing the shelf, went very still for just a moment when she heard him sit down, and then so small he almost missed it. Her shoulders dropped, just slightly, just enough. The tight held-up set of them, releasing a fraction of what they'd been carrying. The way a fist opens one finger at a time when it finally begins to believe it is safe to do so. That same evening, he had made a batch after supper, left them on the cloth on the kitchen shelf to cool. He had not counted them. He did not count them now. But when he passed the shelf before bed, he saw that June's dress hung on the peg by the east room door. Had a small flat shape in the left pocket. He turned the lamp down. He went to his room. He lay in the dark and thought about a little girl who had spent weeks putting pieces of food in her pocket because the world had taught her that what was in your hand right now might be all there was, and who was still doing it even here, even now, because 5 years old is not old enough to unlearn a thing like that in 11 days, no matter how safe the house feels. Not yet, but she was filling her cup before he came inside. That was something. That was, in fact, everything. It was the morning of the 12th day when Harlan saw the man on the road. He was standing at the far end of the property line, just past the old fence post, in the shade of the single juniper that marked the western edge of the claim. He was not doing anything. He was simply standing there, looking at the house with the patient stillness of someone who has been told to watch and is watching. Harlan recognized the coat. It belonged to one of Slade's men from Socorro. He went inside. He did not tell the girls. But that evening, he oiled his rifle without particular hurry and set it where he could reach it. And he sat on the porch until the stars were fully out, and the road was empty, and the desert had gone completely quiet. And he listened. Roy, Slade came back on a Sunday. He did not come alone. There were 2 men with him on horses, men Harlan did not recognize, but whose type he knew well enough, the kind of men who hired out their presence more than their labor, who stood slightly behind whoever was paying them and let that proximity do its work. Slade dismounted at the gate with the unhurried ease of a man making a social call. He had dressed well for it, clean shirt, hat brushed, the smile already in place before he'd finished tying his horse. Harlan was on the porch. He did not stand up. "Week's up," Slade said pleasantly. "Came to collect the girls." "They're inside," Harlan said. "Good." Slade put one foot on the porch step. "I'd like to talk first," Harlan said. Slade looked at him. The smile adjusted slightly, the way a lamp adjusts when someone turns the wick, still lit but differently. "Of course," he said. He did not move his foot from the step. Harlan looked at the 2 men on horses. He looked at Slade. "The land claim," he said. "Thomas Calloway's parcel on the western edge. The consortium's been trying to acquire it." Something passed through Slade's eyes and was gone before it arrived. "I wouldn't know about that," he said. "I'm just family trying to do right by those girls." "The Santa Fe Land Consortium," Harlan says it. "Their representative came through Drywell in March of 1884. Thomas Calloway refused to sell. He was dead by October." He paused. "Eleanor Calloway was dead by November. And you arrived in December with guardianship papers signed by a judge whose name appears on 3 other documents connected to consortium land transfers in this territory." The smile was entirely still now. Not gone. Slade was too practiced for that, but static, held in place by will rather than feeling. "That's a serious thing to say to a man," Slade said. "It is," Harlan agreed. The desert between them was very quiet. One of the horses shifted its weight, and the leather creaked, and then it was quiet again. Tornada. Inside the house, Ada had heard the horses. She had been at the east window since the sound of hooves on the road, standing to one side of the frame the way Harlan had shown her without meaning to show her. She had simply watched him do it once and understood immediately that you looked at things from the edge, not the center. She could see Slade at the porch step. She could see his hands. She reached back without looking and found June's wrist and held it. June had gone completely still beside her. She was not looking out the window. She was looking at Ada's face, reading it the way she always read Ada's face when she needed to know what the world was doing. Ada's face told her to be quiet, and June was quiet, so quiet that her breathing had gone shallow and small, just enough to keep going, no more than that. Ada watched Slade's hands. She had learned to watch hands before faces. Faces lied. Hands were slower to catch up. His hands were still for now. Marta Bess arrived 20 minutes later, which was not coincidence. Harlan had sent word 2 days ago through the Garrett boy, a simple message: "If Slade comes back before I come to you, bring what you have." Marta came up the road in her wagon with a flat expression and a document, a box, on the seat beside her that she carried under her arm. When she climbed down the way a woman carries something she has been keeping safe for a long time and is relieved to finally be carrying towards something useful. Slade watched her come up the path. His smile had not returned. "Mr. Slade," Marta said without looking at him. She handed the box to Harlan. Inside were 3 things. The first was a letter in Thomas Calloway's handwriting, dated August 1884, addressed to no one specific. The kind of letter a man writes when he understands he may not be there to speak for himself. It named the consortium. It named the representative who had come to his door. It named the figure they had offered and the figure they had implied they would take by other means if the offer was refused. It named Sheriff Grant Mercer as the man who had delivered the final offer in person in uniform on a Tuesday evening when Eleanor was visiting her sister and the girls were asleep. The second was a copy of the deed to the Calloway land claim, with Thomas's signature and a surveyor's annotation in the margin noting the claim's position relative to the proposed rail corridor from Santa Fe. The third was a bill of sale dated 3 weeks after Eleanor Calloway's death, transferring the land claim from Roy Slade as legal guardian of Ada and June Calloway to the Santa Fe Land Consortium, signed by Slade, notarized in Socorro. Harlan looked up from the bill of sale. "The girls are 5 and 6 years old," he said. "They can't sign away their inheritance. Their guardian can't sign it away for them without a federal probate proceeding." He set the paper down, "which means this transfer is fraudulent, which means everything built on it is fraudulent." He looked at Slade. "Including your guardianship." Slade was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed register. The pleasantness was gone, and what was underneath it was not rage. Rage would have been easier, more readable. What was underneath it was the flat, cold patience of a man recalculating. "You're a careful man, Cole," he said. "I'll give you that." He looked at the document box. "But careful men in this territory have a way of finding their situations complicated by forces they didn't account for." He glanced toward the house. "A man alone, 2 children that aren't his, documents that could be questioned by any number of parties." He picked up his hat from where he'd set it on the railing. "I'd think about that." He put his hat on. He walked back to his horse. He did not hurry. The 2 men followed him down the road without looking back, and the sound of hooves faded into the dry afternoon heat. And then there was only the desert and the juniper and the dust still hanging in the air where they had been. Marta looked at Harlan. "He'll go to Mercer," she said. "I know," Harlan said. "Mercer will make it legal looking. He's good at that." "I know that too." Marta looked at the document box. "Thomas put that letter in my keeping 8 months before he died," she said. "He told me to hold it until someone came who would know what to do with it." She paused. "I waited a long time for that someone." Harlan looked at the road where the dust was still settling. There is a particular kind of courage that asks nothing in return and announces itself to no one The courage of a man who keeps a dead woman's letter for 8 months because she trusted him with it. The courage of a child who watches from the edge of a window because she has learned that seeing clearly is the only protection she has. We tell ourselves we would do the right thing, but the right thing, when it arrives, rarely looks the way we imagined. It looks like a document box. It looks like a Sunday morning. It looks like two small girls standing very still in a dark room, waiting to find out what kind of world they are living in. Ask yourself, if you had been Thomas Calloway, building a case in secret while the walls closed in, would you have had the faith to believe that someone, somewhere would know what to do with what you left behind? They came on a Wednesday morning before the heat arrived. Sheriff Grant Mercer rode in front of his silver badge, catching the early light the way it always did. Deliberately, Harlan had always thought, the way a man polishes something when he wants it to be the first thing you see about him. Behind him were 2 deputies and Roy Slade, and behind Slade were the same 2 men from Socorro who said nothing and were paid not to. 6 riders total for a man alone with 2 children. Harlan was on the porch when they came up the road. He had been on the porch since before dawn, because the desert at night carries sound farther than people account for. And he had heard a horse on the far road at 2 in the morning and had not gone back to sleep after that. He had his rifle across his knees. He did not raise it. Mercer pulled up at the gate with the unhurried authority of a man who has never had to rush because the law has always arrived before he did. He looked at Harlan on the porch, at the rifle, at the house behind him. He smiled. It was a different smile from Slade's. Where Slade's smile was practiced, Mercer's was comfortable. The smile of a man who has been right so many times in a row that being right has stopped feeling like an effort and started feeling like a condition. "Morning, Cole," he said. "No trouble needed here. I've got a legal order for the return of the Calloway miners to their appointed guardian." He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper, signed by Judge Aldous in Socorro yesterday afternoon. He held it out. Harlan did not move from his chair. "That land transfer," Harlan said. "The one Slade signed 3 weeks after Eleanor Calloway died. You notarized." Mercer's smile did not change. "I did," he said. "Legal document, legally witnessed. That's my job." "The girls were 5 and 6 years old when their father died," Harlan said. "Their inheritance can't be transferred without federal probate. You know that. Guardianship law in this territory gives considerable latitude to appointed guardians acting in the interests of their wards," Mercer said. He had the smooth, unhurried delivery of a man who has rehearsed this. "Mr. Slade acted within his legal authority. The transfer has been recorded." He looked at the document in his outstretched hand. "Now, I'd like to do this without difficulty." Inside the East Room, Ada heard his voice. She knew the voice before she saw the badge through the window. She knew it the way she knew certain sounds now. The particular knock Roy Slade used on doors. The specific creak of the third porch board under a heavy boot. The sound of horses that were coming with purpose rather than passing through. She had filed these sounds away in the careful, quiet part of herself that had been keeping inventory since October, since the night the kitchen caught fire and the world became a place where knowing what was coming next was the only thing that helped. She pulled June back from the window. June's eyes were very wide. She had her fingers pressed to her lips, both hands, and she was looking at Ada with an expression that had no name, but that Ada understood completely. The expression of a child who is trying to be as small and as quiet as possible, because some part of her believes that if she is small enough and quiet enough, whatever is happening outside will not be able to find her. Ada put her arms around her sister and held on. She did not say it's all right. She had stopped saying things she didn't know were true. She just held on, and June pressed her face into Ada's shoulder, and Ada watched the window and listened to the voices outside and counted the horses and thought about the document box on the kitchen table and thought about her father's handwriting on the letter inside it and thought about what her father would have done. She thought she knew. "I'm not giving them back to him," Harlan said. He said it quietly. Not as a challenge, not as a provocation, simply as a fact being entered into the record. Mercer looked at him for a moment. The smile was still there, but it had stilled completely now, the way water stills before it freezes. "That's not a choice you have the legal standing to make," Mercer said. "Maybe not today," Harlan said, "but I've got Thomas Calloway's letter. I've got the deed copy with the surveyor's notation. I've got the bill of sale Slade signed before any federal probate was opened." He looked at Mercer steadily. "And I've got the name of the federal land office in Santa Fe that's been looking at consortium acquisitions in this territory for the past 8 months. He paused. "I sent them a copy 3 days ago, by rider, not telegraph. I didn't use the county line." Something shifted in Mercer's face. Not much, barely anything. But it was there, and Harlan saw it, and it was the first time in this entire conversation that the sheriff looked like a man who was accounting for something he had not accounted for. Slade's horse moved beneath him. Slade said nothing, but his hands on the reins had changed. It was the east room door that opened. Harlan heard it behind him. He heard the small footsteps on the floorboards, 2 sets, one slightly heavier than the other, and then Ada was standing in the porch doorway with June behind her, June's hands holding the back of Ada's dress the way they always did. Ada looked at Roy Slade. She looked at him with those dark eyes that had her father in them, and she did not look away. Slade met her gaze for a moment. He looked away first. Ada stepped forward until she was standing beside Harlan's chair. She did not touch him. She simply stood there next to him and looked at the men on horses with the steady, unafraid attention of a child who has decided something and is done deciding. Her voice, when it came, was small, but it did not shake. "My papa wrote down what you did," she said. She was looking at Mercer now, at the silver badge, at the comfortable smile that had finally gone still. "He wrote it all down. He said, 'The truth has enough roads to travel.'" She paused. "He said it always gets where it's going." The desert was absolutely quiet. June had come to stand beside her sister. She was not looking at men. She was looking at Ada, the way she always looked at Ada, when Ada did something that June felt in her whole body, but could not yet find words for. Her eyes were bright and wet at the edges, but she did not make a sound. Her hand found Ada's. Ada held it. Mercer looked at the 2 girls, standing on the porch of Harlan Cole's house in the early Wednesday morning light. And whatever calculation he was running behind that still face, it took longer than usual to complete. This isn't finished, he said finally. No, Harlan agreed. It isn't. He stood up from the chair then. Not fast, not aggressive. He simply stood, and he was a tall man when he stood, and he held the rifle at his side and looked at 6 riders with the calm of someone who has decided exactly how far he will go and is not afraid of the distance. But you're leaving empty-handed today, he said, and tomorrow I ride to Santa Fe. He looked at Mercer. So whatever you and Slade need to do, you've got one day to do it in. Mercer held his gaze for a long moment. Then he turned his horse. He did not say anything else. He rode back down the road the way he had come, Badge catching the morning light one more time as he went, and Slade and the deputies and the 2 men from Socorro followed him, and the sound of them faded into the dry New Mexico air, and then there was only the desert and the stillness and the dust. There is a kind of strength that does not announce itself. It does not raise its voice. It does not reach for the loudest weapon in the room. It simply stands in a doorway, small and certain, and says what is true and refuses to be moved. A child who has lost everything and still chooses to speak, not because she is unafraid, but because she has found something worth being afraid for. That is not weakness learning to be brave. That is courage remembering what it was made of. Fauna. He rode to Santa Fe the next morning. He was gone 4 days. Marta Bess kept the girls at the dry goods store while he was away, which was Marta's idea and not his, offered before he could ask. In the flat, practical way, she did everything that mattered. She put them in the back room with a cot and a lamp and told them they could help with inventory if they wanted to. And Ada had apparently decided that she wanted to, because Marta reported afterward that every tin of tobacco in the store had been recounted and reorganized by size. June had reorganized the buttons by color, then by number of holes. Marta said she had not asked her to do this, but that the result was objectively an improvement. The Federal Land Office had already opened a proceeding. Thomas Calloway's letter, the deed copy, the fraudulent bill of sale, taken together with what the federal investigator had been assembling for 8 months from the other side. It was enough. More than enough? The kind of enough that made the investigator set down his coffee cup and read the whole thing twice before he said a word. Mercer was relieved of his position on a Friday. Slade was arrested in Socorro the following Monday. The guardianship order suspended pending the fraud investigation. It would take months to move through the courts. These things always did. But the documents were in federal hands now, and the land claim was frozen, and the 2 girls from Drywell, New Mexico, were nobody's ward but their own until a judge with clean hands and a full record decided otherwise. Harlan came back on a Thursday evening with dust on his coat and a letter from the federal office in his pocket, and the particular tiredness of a man who has done something that needed doing and is glad it is done. The lamp was lit in the front room when he came up the road. He stopped for a moment at the gate. He looked at the light in the window. He had not had a lit window waiting for him in 3 years. They were at the table when he came in. Ada and June, with the remains of supper between them and a candle burned down to its last inch. Ada looked up when the door opened. She assessed him the way she always did, a full second, top to bottom, checking, and then something in her face settled back into its evening shape. June looked up and then looked back down at the table. In front of her, set in the exact center of the space between her plate and Harlan's empty chair, was a biscuit, whole, unbroken. Not in her pocket, on the table. Harlan stood in the doorway and looked at the biscuit and did not trust himself to speak for a moment. He took off his hat. He hung it on the peg by the door. He pulled out his chair and sat down. He looked at the biscuit. He looked at June. June was looking very hard at the grain of the table, with the elaborate concentration of someone who has done something and is not sure how it will be received, and has decided that not watching is safer than watching. Her shoulders were up near her ears. Harlan picked up the biscuit. He ate it. June's shoulders came down, not all at once. Slowly, the way the desert cooled at evening, gradually and then completely, the tension, leaving her small body 1 degree at a time, until she was just a 5-year-old girl sitting at a table after supper with her hands in her lap and her face. When she finally looked up, wearing the most careful, most tentative, most entirely real, almost smile that Harlan Cole had ever seen in his life. He nodded at her once. She looked back down at the table, but the almost smile stayed. Ada watched all of this from across the table. Her dark eyes moved from June to Harlan and back again. And for a moment the careful, older-than-it-should-be expression dropped entirely, and she looked exactly like what she was. A 6-year-old girl who had held the world together through sheer will for a very long time and was beginning, slowly and tentatively, and with enormous caution, to consider the possibility that she might not have to do it alone anymore. She did not say anything. She reached across the table and pulled the candle closer, so the light was better. That was all. That was enough. Outside, the New Mexico night settled over Drywell the way it always did, completely and full of stars, and indifferent to the small warm light in the window of a house at the edge of town where a man and 2 little girls were sitting at a table in the quiet. Can a man who turned his back on the world become the whole world to 2 children who had none? Your home is not the place that was given to you. It is the place where someone leaves a light on. It is the place where a biscuit on a table means I saved this for you, and I was not afraid to. She had not lost her way. She had lost the ground beneath her feet, and on a Thursday evening in July, quietly, without announcement, she began to feel it again, solid and real and there, 1 biscuit at a time. Every time I see your comments come in from different cities, different countries, different corners of the world, I am reminded that a story about 2 little girls and a biscuit in a pocket can travel farther than any of us expect. Because it is not really about New Mexico in 1885. It is about every child who ever learned to want something quietly. Every person who ever saved something small because the world had taught them that small was all there was. Every one of us who has ever stood in a doorway, uncertain, watching to see if the light inside was meant for us. You knew Ada and June before you met them today. You have been them, or you have loved someone who was. That is why you are still here. Where in the world are you listening from right now? Drop your city in the comments. I read every single one, and every single one matters. If you still believe that the right person appearing at the right moment can change the entire direction of a life, this channel will keep telling stories for you. The next one is already waiting.